With a debt that may be as high as $20 billion, Detroit is a city that may be on the brink of bankruptcy. It is the focus of Detroit 2020 special reports all this week right here on 7 Action News at 11. But would bankruptcy really be a good thing for the city?
And joining us right now live to talk about this, Detroit News columnist Nolan Finley and Detroit Free Press columnist Stephen Henderson. Thank you for both coming in. You guys are always very vocal about this. I'll ask you both the same question. I'll start with Stephen. Kevin Orr has a plan to restructure. Is it enough? Will it work?
Well, I think it is probably enough because, frankly, the city doesn't have any money, and so what he's offering is what we've got, which is a little bit of nothing for everybody. I think the creditors and the unions alike would be smart to sort of recognize that going to bankruptcy would force a long, drawn-out process, but probably wouldn't result in any more for either of them because of the fact that we just don't have any more than he's given them.
Nolan?
Well, I mean, the plan is going to be implemented. The question is whether it's implemented by Kevin Orr with the cooperation of all of the parties or whether it's implemented in bankruptcy court. And right now, I would come down on the side of that it's probably going to go to bankruptcy court because it asks a lot of sacrifice of the stakeholders, particularly of the pension funds.
Yeah.
And I think if they can't stomach the sort of cuts that he's proposing, it very likely will end up a bankruptcy judge deciding this.
We've talked about union contracts weighing heavily on the city of Detroit for years now. Two big blows today with Kevin Orr hitting two unions really hard. Your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, I think it's a necessary step in this process. He has the power to rewrite contracts and to get them into a form that the city can afford. And I think that's the key at every step here. What can the city afford? And it's his job to decide that and to implement the steps.
Yeah, I mean, personnel costs are always your highest, and in Detroit they're higher than they are almost anywhere else in the country, partially because of the negotiations that have taken place. So
yes.
you gotta,
The union may see it differently, but we
sure.
know that.
Yeah, Stephen, you wrote last week that the city spends 46 cents of every dollar in public safety, 38 cents just servicing its debt and long-term debt, and is that the formula that has to change?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. GM, when they went into bankruptcy, they weren't spending as much on debt as the city is spending per dollar, and so there's just no way to sustain that. I mean, if you live in the city, as I do, you see every day that the lights are out. You know, my wife and kids walk in the dark from the garage to our building every day. If something happens and we have to call the cops, they're not going to show up on time. These are things that are unsustainable. And you got to reconfigure the money to do better.
And that figure is going to 64 cents on every dollar by 2017 if nothing changes, which means that city residents would be paying the biggest part of their tax bill to support retired workers and their health care, and nothing left over for public safety services, what have you.
I got a tweet shortly ago from Susan Watts, who lives in Detroit, and she says, frankly, she doesn't care if it's bankruptcy, she doesn't care if it's Orr, she just wants her lights on.
Yeah.
Is that a sentiment you're finding?
I think that's where those of us who live in the city are at this point. You can't raise a family in the city with the conditions that we have, and that's why people are leaving. We're still losing, what is it, 20,000 people a year, they estimate, in Detroit, which makes the financial situation worse because those people take their tax dollars with them.
Absolutely.
You've got to start reversing that, giving people a reason to want to live in the city, pay the taxes so we can have good service.
Better city services, better education, and they want to feel safe. But let's talk about this. So if Kevin Orr takes the city of Detroit through bankruptcy, then what? How do we move the city forward, and how long will it realistically take? Are we talking about years to move forward and see a brighter future, or?
Well, I mean, you could see a brighter future rather quickly. I think you're already seeing a brighter future in Detroit just in the priorities he set. I think the beauty of the Kevin Orr plan is that he puts residents first. And that's the first time that's happened in a long time. He's going to set aside $1.2 billion for public safety improvements, blight removal. I think you'll see a difference rather quickly. I don't think this is going to be a prolonged bankruptcy, or at least I hope it won't be. The question is life after bankruptcy,
yes,
when the elected officials take over again, and whether this sort of reform culture, reform mindset can be sustained by the political leaders.
Yeah, and that's the question we need to be asking in the municipal elections that happen this fall. Who is the person who can rebuild the city after Kevin Orr restructures the finances?
And lead the city forward.
So as a bankruptcy, because I know you kind of lean towards the idea that you think bankruptcy is going to happen, do you think bankruptcy is such a negative connotation that it's going to damage the future of the city, as opposed to at least an emergency manager getting the act in order?
I mean, it's not going to be painless, and it's not going to, well, the city's not going to go through it unscathed. I think the key is how much of it can be done through cooperation with the creditors, so you don't have a drawn-out process, a long process. If this thing goes 2 to 3 years, it'll damage the city. If they can get in and out in 18 months, that would be, I think, a positive for the city.
Stephen, let's give you the last word.
Well, there's some ripple effects too. I mean, communities around Detroit will have some ramification on their credit ratings and other things if Detroit goes through bankruptcy. So that's a reminder that what happens in Detroit affects everybody in Southeast Michigan.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to have you sit tight because we're going to talk more about the city council's crisis right now in the city.